Jedi Survivor is one of the best video games I've ever played. With influences from Elden Ring, God of War, and even the Uncharted series, there is something here for everyone as Respawn has streamlined many of the features that these games have to offer, creating the next stepping stone in what it means to be a AAA title. While most companies would simply slap a Star Wars brand onto any piece of media and just shove it out the door, I don't believe that to be the case here. While the galaxy far, far away is of course the blueprint that props up this game's infrastructure, that's really the most unimportant part, as it's really the blend and implementation that makes this architecture so unique. Between the amazing story, fluid combat, and intuitive level design, there really isn't much more that I could ask for in terms of a sequel to Fallen Order. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, as the performance at launch was disastrous at best and unethical at worst. But even with that awful performance review, I still think it's safe to say that this game will go down in history as not only one of the best Star Wars games ever made, but one of the best third-person action-adventure games on the market. This is Jedi Survivor.
Not a bad view, huh,
I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the performance aspect in this video. It's been beaten to death, but I will briefly cover it because I did find an interview online of the game's director that I think shed some light on this whole situation. It's no secret that Jedi Survivor had a terrible launch regarding the performance and stability, adding to that trend of video games being patched and updated to their complete state post-launch rather than before the actual release date. Games like Darktide, Wild Hearts, Modern Warfare 2, and so on, this list just keeps growing and the time between releases becomes shorter where they're just complete and utter trash. Now, I personally played on the PlayStation 5, and while the first few days were rough, I will say that it was playable. However, on the 1st and 2nd of May, Respawn released patches for both PC and console that allegedly fixed a ton of issues that players were having. And while I will not speak for everyone here, I will say that this patch did absolute wonders for me personally and elevated my gameplay experience tenfold for sure. Terrible dynamic resolution scaling, screen tearing, weird motion blur effects, and bad frame rates more or less became a thing of the past, or at least they were significantly reduced. And I hate to put on my tinfoil hat here, but that's some very quick turnaround. A full AAA release on the 28th of April, and then less than a week later, there's a brand new patch fixing most, if not all, of the performance issues. And listen, what I'm about to show you may seem a little conspiratorial, but it seems like Respawn knew that the game wasn't going to be ready to ship at the date that they even delayed it to, and the suits at EA didn't even have a problem with the initial delay in the first place.
What is it like when you have to go to the bosses and ask for more time on a game with A, an already announced release date, and B, this is a big game. This is a big game for Respawn. This is a big game for EA. This is a big game for EA shareholders. Like, this is, it's a big deal. Can you walk me through that process? Like, I'm curious what it's actually like when you have to go and try and get more time on something like this.
I'm not going to say it's easy. There's a lot of painstaking tracking that we're doing while we're making the game, and we're looking at when we're supposed to ship. That begins day one. As we were getting closer to the finish line, it was clear to us that if we wanted to hit, the quality mark that we wanted to hit and get it as bug-free as possible, that more time was needed. Bug-free as possible. Luckily, the conversations weren't that difficult because all the, higher ups within the organization at EA and Lucasfilm as well, they could see the potential in this game. And, we made our case, but it wasn't that tough. When we all kind of made the decision, there was a sigh of relief because we wanted to see it as good as it possibly could be. And we wanted the effort the team put into it for 3 years to be worth something.
Goddamn liar!
Now listen, I'm not a game dev and I don't claim to be, but around January when the delay was announced, it seems that the game director was aware that the game was still underbaked regarding its performance and could have had more time to make sure that things were polished fully. So the question is, why didn't they take more time? This is really unfortunate and quite frankly a contradiction to the statement released by Respawn stating that the game wasn't performing to their standards upon release and even blaming their customers to some extent. And there really isn't much more to say than that other than that it's just completely unacceptable. And, maybe I am missing something here from the interview. I don't know. I do recommend taking a listen to the whole thing as Stig discusses how the team worked tirelessly over Zoom calls to get this game done in just over 3 years, which is a marvel of game development, which makes this situation all the more unfortunate as the devs could have had more time to work on this game to stabilize its performance. Now that we got the controversy out of the way, why do I think this game is helping to push the medium of the games industry forward for this generation? Well, to boil it down to one word, that would be seamlessness. Jedi Survivor has the best synergy of any video game I think I've ever played. There is never a moment that you are not engaged with Cal, as the entire structure of this game is propped up on putting you into a flow state that is very hard to break out of. And while gameplay is the catalyst of this, that isn't the only part of Jedi Survivor's ideology. The implementation of narrative, side quests, puzzles, and even the accessibility features are all intertwined to keep you engaged at all times. I can't tell you how many moments I would just be parkouring around the galaxy, listening to an echo, fighting an enemy, and then entering a boss battle, and it felt like there was never a break in my momentum. I want to liken this to God of War Ragnarok. The games are very similar in the sense that they are both like cinematic and have third-person combat, but God of War Ragnarok isn't nearly as seamless as Jedi Survivor, and I would argue that it isn't a bad thing, it's just a different take on the art form. At every video game's core, the game is supposed to be so engaging that you never want to put your controller down. This is something that God of War doesn't put at the forefront of its ideology, as they're trying to tell a different type of story and grab your attention in other ways. That's why there are moments of downtime where you simply are just rowing a boat down a river in a dream sequence, or sitting in a tent doing absolutely nothing. This is part of the Sony cinematic video game brand. Not a good or a bad thing, it's just how they tell their stories. And similar to games like Spider-Man or God of War, Jedi Survivor also feels like you're playing a movie, and a Star Wars movie at that, but it still feels like a video game first and foremost. All that cinematic flair is in here, and it's done exceptionally well, but it doesn't come at the cost of the gameplay. Many video games have come close to nailing this balance, but they always fall on one side or the other. Jedi Survivor brings that balance while tightening up the process as well, which is a style that I much prefer and hope is parroted by the AAA industry for years to come. I have heard a lot of mixed things when it comes to the combat of this game. There are a lot of people who say it feels great and it's some of the best combat that they've ever experienced, and there's others who just say it's completely bland or flat out awful. And I'm here to tell you that the combat is pretty damn good, although it can be finicky at times. Respawn have done an amazing job at making you feel like a Jedi. The gameplay loop is so damn fast and fluid, it's unlike anything I've ever played. Cal uses lightsabers, blasters, the force abilities, not to mention his parkour skills, and even BD1 helps in combat now. The toolbox at your disposal is truly magnificent and is used in a ton of great ways other than combat as you explore the various worlds and uncover their hidden secrets. Cal is given 5 different lightsaber stances that allow him to engage with various enemies depending on their particular style of combat. There is the single, the double-bladed, the dual-wield, the blaster stance, and of course the cross guard, which is like your heavy attack. While each of these stances do bring about some nice change in combat depending on what type of player you are, they are all similar enough to where you can actually just stick with one playstyle the whole game if you really wanted to. And I can see that being a criticism, but I really don't think it is. For general enemy types, being able to mess around and have different experiences depending on my mood, or just if I wanted to challenge myself, that's actually really awesome and provides a ton of freedom in gameplay. For example, I preferred to use the single blade stance as I just thought it looked cool and had kind of that old school Star Wars vibe, but it's also the most balanced, which allowed me to focus on offense and defense equally. And when it came to some boss fights, depending on how strong or fast they were, I would need to alter my playstyle significantly to take them down, and this really helped me become a better player and flush out the combat system so that I was well versed in all stances. During the Ravis boss fight, I would use the cross guard stance because of the heavy defense and power attack, and I could focus on blocking and knocking his stamina bar down significantly, which is something that the dual wield wouldn't be able to do as well. But with Dagan Gera, I would use the single and double blade since he was much faster than normal and I needed to have great defense as well as speed. Personally, I think that this combat system has the perfect amount of depth for a game like this. this. If we simply only had lightsabers for our offensive capabilities, it would make more sense to focus on differentiating things much as possible and having really deep skill trees with each type of stance. But in order to keep that power fantasy alive and combine the use of the Force, I think that Respawn chose the right path when it came to implementing this combat feature set. And speaking of the Force, I don't know how they did it, but Respawn fucking nailed it. Using Force Pull or Force Push was really damn cool, as was seeing enemies being slammed to the ground. And not only did it feel good in the hands, but the sounds and the visual cues were just perfect. I could go on and on about how this game feels with the DualSense controller, the visual, the audio, and the haptic feedback just coming together at such a high level. This should be the standard going forward for any AAA title, as nonverbal cues are integral to the player experience. While I think there is a great foundation for combat here, there are some things that I think could be worked on a little bit more. It felt like the perks were pretty middle of the road, as I simply just put on anything that gave me more defense, as offensively Cal is more than capable, and I wish I could have utilized BD1 more in combat in tandem with the puzzle solving. I think adding maybe a shoulder grenade or a burst flame could have been a great way to spice up the combat and give those stormtroopers a piece of my mind. And while overall I think combat is really good in this game, I can't help but feel like some of it was a little spammy when it came to either ranged enemy attacks or large group combat. I played the game mostly on Jedi Master and a brief segment of the game on Jedi Grandmaster, and during the toughest difficulty of the game is where I noticed these quote-unquote issues with combat. But here is the obligatory caveat. I understand Jedi Grandmaster is the hardest difficulty, so go ahead and spam skill issue in the comments all you want. I'm not the greatest player in the world, and I don't claim to be. This is just an observation I noticed while playing the game this way. Alright, so the combat in this game is designed to have little to no animation canceling. What this is, if you are unfamiliar, is when your character is performing an action and you see something new pop up on the screen that you need to engage with, you can do so, and the animation that you were previously doing will cancel. Some games have it, others don't, and I think Jedi Survivor needed it, and it would have been an even better combat experience than it already was. When playing the game on the top difficulty, I noticed that enemies were so damn fast, and if I made one wrong move, I was never able to cancel my offensive attack to parry, and I would just get clobbered. And while I don't want to sit here and just compare this game to God of War over and over, I do think it's an apt comparison to make. So when Kratos is in combat, he can pull up his shield at any time to parry any enemy away from him. Doesn't matter if you are about to attack, you can block if you feel threatened. With Elden Ring, it's similar to Jedi Survivor. There is actually no animation canceling when you attack, and you have to follow through, and then you can defend yourself and use those invincibility frames and whatever. But I would argue in Elden Ring, it makes sense since the battle encounters for the most part are significantly slower, whereas Jedi Survivor is one of the fastest games that I have played in a long while. I think there is a lot of precision that goes into Jedi Survivor, but there are moments where the sheer speed of the enemies provides limited opportunity to defend yourself simply because you cannot perform the animation in time. But this really is a small complaint, as Jedi Survivor's combat really clicked for me during the latter half of the game, as I began to understand the nuances of the parry system in combination with the heavy attack system and was able to merge them in a way that felt very rewarding. And I understand that playing on harder difficulties means that the game is going to be more difficult. And to be quite frank, I would rather have enemies that are too fast than spongy enemy tanks that never seem to die. Jedi Survivor has some of the best enemy variety that you will experience throughout the campaign. From just briefly looking at the database menu, I have unlocked over 70 different enemy types, and I'm sure that there are many more. There is never a dull moment when it comes to engaging with your environment and getting into scuffles during your travels. Don't get me wrong, not every enemy is fun to fight. I really hate the stormtroopers with the flamethrowers, and some of the mini-boss robots made me want to throw my DualSense Edge across the room until I remembered it was $200 fucking. Where Jedi Survivor really shines is with the boss battles. Whatever type of objective you're currently chasing, there will always be a giant-ass boss ready to throw hands. It could be the Ninth Sister, it could be Dagon Gera, it could be a Skriton, or it could be Rick the Door Technician. I really love that Respawn did that, by the way. But seriously, these boss battles were the cream of the crop. There is a boss fight with a giant drill that you have to take down from destroying this secret Jedi archive, and the way that Respawn has you engage with it is through parkour and magic. I genuinely just can't describe it with words. Just take a look for yourself.
Jump through, Cal! Now!
I can't believe this!
Believe it! Well done! Nowhere left to run!
Then we stand together.
The last act in particular is packed with boss fights, and I guarantee you will not be bored in the slightest, as Respawn has made sure to provide back-to-back encounters that will stay in your memory for life. Whatever style of boss encounter you're into, I promise it's there. From Darth Vader to alien monsters to extreme parkour, there is honestly never a dull moment. And when you combine the great combat, the constant flow of the game, and the beautiful narrative, there's just nothing else like it. Some of the most important aspects of any video game are its level design and its world building, and Jedi Survivor has Cal and his companions flying all around the galaxy to various locations. And initially, it seems like there actually aren't very many planets to travel to. And while that may be true on paper, it's actually kind of the wrong way to look at it. Of course, not every planet is going to be huge and packed with tons of content, but for the most part, they're all pretty large spaces that require a solid amount of traversal, with Jedha and Kobo being the most dense. But what's really enjoyable about exploring the larger planets is there is actually a ton of diversity in the level design from area to area. Kobo has caves and mountainous regions, Jedha has deserts and temples to explore. Meanwhile, some of the other planets have you traveling through the Empire's bases or cities that are ruled by evil leaders under control of the Empire themselves. Like I said, it might feel like you're doing a lot of ping-ponging back and forth, but really, once you are in the thick of it, these areas feel so different from one another, and most of the time, they're jaw-droppingly beautiful, as the art design and graphical fidelity are completely off the charts. And to continue my obsession with flow state and progression, I don't know if there's anything in this game that is quite as intuitive as the level design. During my playthrough, I don't think I opened my map to navigate to a main campaign location more than a half a dozen times. That's how good the level structure is. I was never lost or confused or stuck thinking for minutes at a time on how to break out to the next locale. Every area is full of context clues, proper lighting, and invokes the most recent skill set that you learned with Cal so that you can progress in that seamless manner I have been constantly harping on. When you combine this with the beautiful Star Wars lore that builds out this universe, there are very few things that are as magnificent as moving your way through an obstacle and overlooking a wondrous view. There is nothing more frustrating to me than when you're making great progress in a game and then you just get roadblocked by incompetent level design that is designed to waste your time. But Jedi Survivor doesn't do that. Instead, each area is carefully crafted to suit the current progression that the player is sifting through. Not to mention, each section builds off one another quite nicely and is packed with content. This makes every experience throughout the game feel very unique, yet tethered delicately via the movement and combat systems. Through the use of puzzles, parkour, and combat, there is always a path for the player to trudge through, not because you have to, but because you want to. Most games in the current generation want to sit there and sell you a bunch of bullshit DLC, map packs, weapon and character skins, all under the guise of a battle pass or exclusive edition that gets you premium content on day one. I praised the Resident Evil 4 remake for being a perfect game, and while I do think it is phenomenal, even Capcom sold lame DLC content for players to have all treasure maps and essentially infinite money for their playthrough, which obviously gives players an inherent advantage just by spending a little more IRL cash. Respawn waves a massive middle finger to that garbage system and gives us everything we could want inside of the game. Initially, my warning sensors tripped up when this happened with Fallen Order a few years ago. EA, the publisher, is allowing Respawn to put out a game with no microtransactions. Have you played Apex Legends, my guy? I think it's fair that people were skeptical and waiting for the other shoe to drop. But it never did, and it still hasn't. All the customization in the game is for Cal's clothes, the lightsaber, BD1, his black blaster, and there is a ton more unlockable content. You can travel all over the galaxy and find loot crates that have random items in them, or you can complete side quests from NPCs and get rewards that way. And the best part is, nobody is asking you to turn over your credit card to get the 3 digits on the backside. And while I'm happy none of the predatory microtransactions are in the game, I am even more impressed with the amount of side content that there is to do after you have beat the main story. It feels like some people want every video game to last like 70 hours and just have a severely dense amount of content in them that is never ending. Elden Ring or The Witcher 3, these are games that I think deserve that type of interaction and depth for the player, as these types of games don't come around that often. But games like Jedi Survivor, God of War Ragnarok, or maybe even a Resident Evil game, I think they should have a dense and replayable main campaign, and the side content being a bonus, but it shouldn't be super deep. God of War Ragnarok being a 35-hour campaign with an extra 15 hours of side content is quite appropriate, I think. I want to experience everything the world has to offer, but I think it being limited allows me to build excitement for the next title and really appreciate what I have in the moment. And apparently Respawn's Jedi series is supposed to be a trilogy, which means we are going to have 3 amazing titles to pick from. And right now, Jedi Survivor has the perfect amount of content that I never find myself getting sick of. I simply just want more when the devs are ready to deliver. While there are many things to do for side content, there are 2 things that really stuck out to me as not only great content, but great fan service. The Bounty Hunter segment is a great addition to the game, as well as the Holo Tactics table. Holo Tactics allows you to gamble by playing a board game with other NPCs, and you can use any character in the whole game to fight with one another. It's a small little minigame that lets you use stormtroopers, alien monsters, and different robots you come across throughout the game, all while providing rewards for winning. The Bounty Hunter system is pretty simple, where you are given a geolocation for a bounty hunter who is after you, and you hunt them down and you fight them. However, there is a secret Boba Fett Easter egg, which is just a cool little nod to the Star Wars community by letting you live out your fantasy as a Jedi fighting all of these cool enemies. And lastly, we have New Game Plus, which is an absolute necessity to drop with the launch of a game these days. And not only are you able to complete the game from scratch with all of your skill points, collectibles, and perks, you get new perk rewards and cosmetics as well. I mean it when I say that Respawn did an incredible job making the reward system in Jedi Survivor. This is the type of progression and reward system that makes gaming what it is. It's old school fun with a modern twist, and I think it should be heavily praised so that we can see other developers model this in their games in the future. Guys, I actually have a confession to make right now. I am not a Star Wars fan. All right, I said it. I'm sorry. Review disliked. Write trash in the comment section. I'm gonna go wander in the desert, never to be seen again. But it's true. I have never been a Star Wars fan. I don't hate it or anything. It's just not my thing. If you love it, hey man, that's totally cool. You do you. That being said, this is one of the most immersive Star Wars experiences I have ever played or watched. And my favorite Star Wars game is Shadows of the Empire from N64, so I think I got a little credibility. Respawn just really nailed the Star Wars atmosphere. From the sounds, the music, the art direction, the level design, and even the story felt like something you would see on the big screen. I mean, they even did those iconic scene wipes when we would be landing the ship on another planet. And I am sure that there are tons of little Easter eggs for the mega fans out there, because it's those little details that matter, that really bring immersion to a whole new level. And while I know that you can say I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm not a Star Wars fan, I actually think because I'm not makes what I'm saying all the more true. I still noticed how Respawn honored the Star Wars legacy while putting on a fresh coat of paint for their own sliver of the universe, which is why I think the story that Jedi Survivor brings to the front and center is so damn good. Initially, things start out as a basic hero's journey with doubt being sown into Cal's heart about what he's doing as the odds are increasingly stacked against him. But then there is a dramatic shift of treachery and deceit that really takes Star Wars to a place that I personally loved. Cal is a much more seasoned character. He is brooding about his purpose of taking down the Empire. He realizes that even with all the effort he has put into taking the bad guys down, that they keep winning and are growing stronger. Eventually, Cal learns of a place called Tanalorr, a hidden planet on the other side of the galaxy that is of myth and legend. He comes to the realization that he could actually take those who were persecuted from the Empire to hide there and thrive as a community. Unfortunately, we wake up Dagan Gera, who is one of the last remaining Jedi who had previously lived on Tanalorr and is trying to get back there, but he has gone rogue and it is up to us to stop him. I also think Respawn has done a really solid job with creating memorable characters and allowing them to grow and change with proper story arcs. They are also willing to take chances with their writing team that allows them to add or remove important characters, which provides much more impact and dramatic flair as the story progresses. Personally, I really liked Cal, Merrin, and Grease. They're all great characters with a lot more depth this time around. Even Cal's and Merrin's relationship was executed tastefully, and it wasn't just shoved in there as some arbitrary subplot. While Cal is in a state of doubt and concern, Merrin is there to have his back, while Grease plays the comic relief and bestows some wisdom every now and again, keeping things afloat for the morale as the team are up against insurmountable odds. I know I said at the beginning of the video that there were going to be spoilers here, but regardless of how much context I provide or how much I tell you, I still think that you need to experience most of the story yourself. Let me put it this way. Jedi Survivor is a damn good story, and it goes much, much deeper than the synopsis that I have just provided. It's compelling, the acting is top-notch, the emotion is raw and palpable, and I think anyone who has a soft spot in their hearts for Star Wars will love it, and people like me who are neutral can even find something to love about it as well. Initially, when you saw the title of this video, you might have thought I was overhyping Jedi Survivor. And if you feel differently, that's totally fine. My main objective here was to exemplify that Respawn have truly defined what I think it means to make a generational foothold in the gaming industry. Beautiful graphics, top-tier gameplay, amazing combat, no microtransactions, cinematic level storytelling and acting, compelling side content, missions, unlocks, movement systems. It has it all, and I don't think I have played any video game like this in my life that has balanced all of these features so perfectly, to the point where you can't put down the controller because you are so immersed. I can see why people were upset with this game at launch. Performance that terrible really hinders the enjoyment for anyone. It did it for me. That's why this review is out so late. I didn't want to ruin my experience, and I'm damn glad I waited. The combat and movement system, which are the bedrock for traversing around this world, are completely inhibited by low frame rates and poor in-game optimization. So it makes sense that people felt the way they did and were having a bad time. And that isn't an excuse for the developers, but when you look past all the commotion surrounding Jedi Survivor, there is in fact a great video game underneath it all. A game so good that I believe it will be one of the few titles that help solidify this console generation.